Hey everyone. Hope you guys are having a great day. I heard from God on this one pretty clearly this morning. This is a subject that He wanted me to hop on and talk about. And this, excuse me, this is a conversation that I feel like we're just going to get real practical with scripture, real practical with steps. And I feel like this is going to be a good conversation for both those that are leaders in the body of Christ, or that are going to be leaders in the body of Christ, but also those who are just a part of the general flock. These are some really needed conversations in the body. And so I want to talk about this a little bit more in depth today, show you guys some scripture on this, kind of chat through some things that I've done wrong over the years, some things that I've done right over the years, and just ways that we can grow more together and what the Bible has to say about how to leave, quote unquote, well. How to leave well is what we're talking about today in the midst of all of this. And so I want to tell you guys up front and say, hey, let me know where you guys are hopping on from as you guys are hopping on. I want you guys to remember this phrase as we go into this conversation. I'll probably say this more than once today, but just in case. How we leave a place or a season often determines how we will do in the next season of our life. And, I think that one of the things that I have learned a lot on over the years is areas where I've done really well with this in my past and areas where I have not done so well with this in the past. And the Bible actually has a lot to say about, navigating interpersonal relationships, and navigating, how we navigate these transition seasons. So I've been talking to you guys a lot about kind of the place of transition, over the last few weeks or so. It's definitely been what God has been bringing up. And I think the reason that He's bringing up this topic is in transition, typically those are times where you are leaving certain places, people, organizations, things you've been a part of for a while, and then you're stepping into the new. Right. During a transition season, we see a lot of that. Right. And so this is a good conversation, regardless of whether or not you find yourself kind of at that crossroads in your life where you're leaving some stuff behind and stepping into the new, because at some point in our lives, we will face this and so learning how to navigate these things in a godly way is extremely important, because again, how you leave a thing in a large part dictates stepping into a thing and what that's going to look like in your next season, right? And so the more that we can learn to grow and navigate in this area, the better in our lives as a Christian. I had a past supervisor at a job, secular job. And she had a conversation with me, and I completely agreed with her on this. It's something that I look at too. And this is for all the leaders out there who you're wanting God to use you in like a bigger leadership position. And she said, Jill, when I'm looking for leaders, in any kind of a capacity, the primary thing that I look for is not skill set. And I was like, I'm following you. And she said, the primary thing that I look for is, do they navigate interpersonal relationships well? How do they do with being kind to people? How do they navigate hard conversations, right? Are they a person who can go there? Or do they just shut down? Are they a person who, can talk people through stuff, who uses tact, who does X, Y, Z, right? And so I completely agreed with her. I was like, that is spot on. That is one of the number one things that, we should be looking for in leaders. And I think that this is not talked about enough, and am I saying that skill set is not important? Of course not, that is a very important component. But I think that a lot of the times we don't attribute this area to a big part of having godly character, when it is 5,010% a reflection of our character. And remember, so much of what I talk to you guys about when we're having these conversations is how our character is very directly tied to the level of promise that we can steward down the line, right? And I'm going to tell you guys a lot. I know a lot of people pray for the big leadership positions in their life, but so much of leadership is, being willing to do the stuff that nobody else is being willing to do. If you're a good leader, right? We've all experienced bad leaders too in our lives, but leadership is being the greatest servant of all. when we're following a godly model, right? Leadership is being willing to lay your life down. It's being willing to work the longer hours. It's being willing to set a good example for people, right? It's being willing to keep good character in the way that we approach people and situations, and so there's a difference between the world's version of leadership versus what Bible has to say about how we should conduct ourselves as leaders, right? And so a big part of that has to do with leaving well in the midst of transition in our lives. And so we're going to get, again, real practical today with some scriptures, with how we do this, how we navigate interpersonal relationships, how we, talk to people, interact with people, prioritize things, address things. And this is going to be a good conversation, again, for leaders in the body of Christ, but also those who are not leaders, who are just a part of the general flock. How do you transition out of an organization, a place, a relationship, well, in a way that would honor and that would please the Lord, right? And so I've had the unique experience of being on both sides of this coin now, as someone who's just kind of a general sheep, general follower, general part of the flock, who's had to navigate leaving workplaces and churches and, connections in my life and XYZ. So I've had that experience, but I've also had the experience both in the secular workplace and in a place of ministry, kind of having more stewardship positions, a little bit more leadership positions, and getting to see that perspective of things. And so what I want to do today is to kind of highlight different things that I've seen from both perspectives, and also primarily highlight what the Bible has to say about a lot of these topics. Because again, I'm going to keep saying this throughout the live today, okay? If you want to operate on next level, if you want to be a good leader, one of those components that is very, very important is operating in godly character. And that has more to do with navigating this place of interpersonal relationships, having hard conversations, navigating conflict well in your personal life. If you are asking for these big things, this is an area that you cannot avoid. And the better you get at this piece, it's going to make you a much more effective leader down the line, and we're just not having needed conversations with leaders. I want to do a little bit of an interactive exercise. I know we don't have a ton of people on here quite yet, but for those of you guys who have joined, thank you and welcome. How many of you guys, just let's take a poll. I don't want you to say names. I don't want you to call out stuff, but how many of you guys have ever left a job because of a bad boss before? Put a hand up in the chat if you have ever had to leave a position before because you had a not so great supervisor, right? Put a hand up in the chat. How many of you guys have ever had to leave an organization before because a leader or a person in charge didn't navigate this area well, the interpersonal stuff, right? I think that I can speak for a lot of people based on at least what polls have to say, and that a lot of us have experienced this in some way, shape, or form, right? Maybe they had a leader or a supervisor in their life, whatever that looks like, who was good at the, practical skills. Some are not. I understand that too. There are bad leaders out there too, but they had people who they understood kind of the how-to, but when it came to a leader who had the guts for standing up for people and making the hard decisions, for navigating conflict, for considering everyone in the group and being considerate towards everyone, so many people, one of their top complaints for why they have to leave jobs and positions, there's a lot of reasons, right? Sometimes it's because the pay isn't good enough to survive on, the benefits, XYZ. But one of the top 3 reasons when they did a poll a while back, for why people leave organizations or why people leave, workplaces, whatever it is because of this particular area. Right? It's because of the inability to navigate social skills and conflict. And so much of this has to do with a character issue in our lives, and so that's why this is extremely important to have this conversation, because, if this one area could get fixed, it would change so much. So let me tell you a story about a very wise CEO that came on at a company. All right. So there was a company that was really, really struggling, and they were losing a lot of employees. It had a pretty high turnover rate. And basically the owner brought in a new CEO to try to figure out what was going on at this particular company. And they started looking through the exit survey kind of stuff, and they pulled the employees on a bunch of different things that were leaving. They asked them about like pay, they asked them about benefits, they asked them about coworkers, supervisors, XYZ, and they found that there was a variety of reasons for some people. It was pretty normal, but a lot of the responses had to do with not supervisors not being knowledgeable in their field or in their job, but it had to do with supervisors not navigating this place of interpersonal relationships well, right? They either were not willing to take a stand for employees in the right way, make hard decisions, call hard shots, do XYZ, or it was a circumstance where they would just give in to people pleasing, and they would, buckle under and not, do XYZ, or they were just really untactful with their communication style. They were very harsh towards employees. They were kind of a dictator, authoritarian type, that it's my way or the highway, and, not being considerate of people, and, having a double standard, right? We've experienced people like this probably before in our past, kind of a deal. And so it had less to do, again, with a lot of what we're talking about today, with the place of skill, and it had way more to do with, they had some leaders who just lacked training, right? They had some leaders who, they had some skill set stuff. The resume looked good, right? But when it came to this place of navigating, interpersonal relationships and how you work with people, they were miserably failing. And, all of these surveys were saying the same thing, and so what they did was they took this group of leaders and they put them through some classes on this exact topic that we're about to talk about today: how to have hard conversations, how to be considerate of people, what to do in different circumstances. And they just kind of laid it out before these people, right? And they had these conversations with them. And then after they forced them to kind of go through this training on this stuff, they dispatched them back, right? And they said, okay, now we want you to go and interact. And all of a sudden, employee turnover did amazingly better. They started to be able to retain employees. The productivity went up in the workplace. And it's all because they addressed this exact area that we're talking about today. And I know that we're talking about how to leave well specifically, but we're going to talk about a lot of concepts that kind of apply to different areas. Let me say hey to you guys as you're hopping on. Hey, Emmanuel. Hey, Amir. Abba's girls, good to see you again. Alicia, Erica, it's so good to see you guys. Thanks for hopping on. So this is why this conversation is super, super important, because the Bible has a lot to say about how we navigate in a place of transition, and how we leave one season carries over into the next season a lot of the time. And I can tell you guys, a lot of times we go, oh, well, it doesn't make that much of a difference. I've lived it. I've seen it. It does, right? And here's the deal. I tell you guys this all the time. If we don't learn our lesson at one place, if we leave wrong in one place, God will allow us to go back around the mountain again, right? That is a test that we have to learn how to pass in our lives, especially if we want to be in leadership one day. And that is so many of you guys, right? And leadership doesn't necessarily have to look like being a pastor of a church, being a supervisor in the secular workplace. A leader can be being the head of your household at home, right? A leader can be being a leader to your kiddos, right? Okay. And so we are all called to leadership in our lives in some way, shape, or form a lot of the time. And these skills are critical, right, for navigating in and out of seasons, right? And we don't even have to be in the high up positions. It's even more important if you are going to be in one of those, right? But this can be as simple as learning how to navigate in and out of a church well. Maybe you were called to a church for a particular season and now it's time to go. How do you navigate that situation with a place of grace and in a way that honors the Lord? It matters, right? Maybe it looks like you're switching out of a particular job assignment or ministry assignment in your life. How do you navigate that well with the place of grace in a way that honors God? right? Maybe it looks like navigating out of certain relationships in your personal life. How do you navigate that with a place of grace that honors God well? And so you can see there's a lot of different examples in our lives where this exact topic is so incredibly important, regardless of whether or not you're going to be the big CEO at the company, the pastor of the huge church XYZ. I'm not saying that stuff is bad. It's good. It's even more important for those people, but it's important for all of us in our lives. And how we navigate this is a direct reflection of our character and our maturity level in Christ, our ability to navigate these conversations, right? And to do this stuff well. And so I want to give you a couple of different sides to look at today. The side of leaders and how they can improve, right? Because you guys have encountered leaders who have not handled this stuff maturely probably in the past, right? And also on the side of the people who are leaving and who are navigating out and into the new thing. We have also handled that very immaturely sometimes, And so this is really, really important for us to just get into the practical nitty-gritty details today. So that's what we're going to be talking about. All right. So the first thing that I want to do is kind of give both groups, regardless of which place you find yourself in, a few things that you can do prior to navigating out of a place or a thing. Hey, Danny, it's good to see you. The first thing you want to do is when it's time to leave a thing, and we've talked about this in a previous live a little bit, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it's important backstory. When it's time to leave a thing, a lot of the times you will start to notice little things that no longer add up. It felt like it was a good fit before. It felt like the total picture, was in alignment with where God was taking you with your assignment. But when it's approaching time to shift, you will start to notice little areas a lot of the time that are no longer in alignment. And it may not always be super big things, can be. But sometimes it's little things that you'll start to notice that are no longer in alignment, right? Somehow you'll start to notice that your purpose is no longer completely aligned with that person, that organization, whatever, right? Somehow you'll start to notice that motives are no longer in alignment, right? Somehow you'll notice that like even job descriptions are no longer in alignment. You signed up for one thing and now it looks like a different thing, right? And so this can look like a lot of different things, but you will start to notice these little quote unquote things. They're not so little, but they seem little in the context of like the deal breaker kind of stuff that will start to not line up, And so that's one of the things that you will start to notice when it's approaching time for a shift a lot of the time is the season will change. And I want to tell you guys that, a lot of the times in our lives, whether it's the people we're in alignment with or the organizations, it's not necessarily that us or them are bad. Okay. And this is the thing. I think that we are so tempted to demonize an organization or a person because it's no longer a good fit for us. We should not do that, ladies and gents. It's okay to recognize that it's no longer a good fit. That's important, right? But we've got to get ourselves to a place where we don't, completely hate on a thing because we see the areas where it's lacking or we see the areas where it doesn't add up, that can also be really unhealthy when it comes to the context of leaving and of shifting out of stuff in a mature way, right? But the first thing that we've got to recognize well with how to leave well is to recognize the shift, recognize when that shift is coming in, okay? There's two groups of people that I generally see with this. And I think that we all tend to lean more in one direction or the other in our lives. There's a group of people who they stay too long with stuff because they're just very loyal and they care about people's hearts. They're afraid of confrontation. They let fear call the shots. And so they will sit in a situation that's been dead for a long, 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 long time because of the wrong motives, because of people pleasing or because they don't want to hurt another person or, it's comfortable, XYZ, and they will sit in that place, right? Danny, you were so awesome. Yes. Recognize the shift. So they'll sit in that place and they'll be more tempted to be one of those people where they, just kind of numb and suppress the stuff that's going wrong and they won't recognize it and they're afraid to move out of it, right? That's group number one. Group number two, on the flip side, are those that are too quick to leave a thing, right? The moment any little problem comes up, they know bad of a situation, right? They lack conflict resolution skills. They aren't willing to talk through things with people to try to come to resolutions, right? And And so I've seen both sides of this, right? And both sides represent a lack of maturity. Can we just be real today? I'm sure that we both found ourselves on, both sides of this at different times in our lives, but both sides of this are immature because we're not being obedient to God. That's what I want us to focus on today. Our primary objective when we are leaving things, right? Yes, Danny. Thank you. Our primary objective when we are navigating seasons of transition and when we're talking about this conversation of how to leave well is we need to be obedient to what God is telling us to do, right? And so that can look like not sitting in a thing long term, even if we know it's going to upset other people's feelings, if we know that it's no longer a good fit and God's telling us to, move along. Or it can look like allowing ourselves, if we're one of those people that just likes to hop out of things super quickly, it can look like forcing ourselves to sit in a situation to learn those conflict resolution skills, right? And to talk through stuff and to work through stuff rather than just throwing things away instantly, right? Now, how do you know the difference? That's a big thing to watch for too. How do you know the difference between a person who is just noping out too quickly out of situations versus a person who is sitting too long in a situation and is in a place of disobedience with not leaving, right? That's something that, first of all, has to be a you and Jesus conversation because there's not going to be a one size fits all on that, okay? A lot of that's going to have to do with where God is taking you next, right? Some people, places, situations, organizations, or whatever, they're never going to be willing to go to a depth and to a level that God is trying to take you to in your personal life because you're trying to change and they're not, right? That is a deal breaker situation where you can't force another person, organization, or thing to do something, and you just got to nope out of that. You can't try to force people. You can't try to do XYZ, right? But then there are some situations in our personal lives, where we are talking to people or things and conflict naturally comes up because we are in a place of relationship with people. Both parties are imperfect, right? And you don't just need to nope out of that situation because there's a little bit of an impasse or because you don't see eye to eye on something. You try to work through it, right? Those are not, you've got to identify what the deal breakers are. Okay. And that's a conversation. I like this comment from Alicia. She said, yes, deal breaker situation when they want to stay the same and it's their way or the highway. Bingo. That because we can't change people and it's not our job. Right. Okay. So here's the deal. You've got to figure out in all of these situations, whether it's a workplace, whether it's a relationship that you're in, whether it's a ministry situation, what are your deal breakers for being a part of that thing? And that's something you've got to get from God. Okay. That should not just be us and our flesh determining things. That needs to be a conversation that you're having between you and Jesus. I'll give you an example of a deal breaker for me in the past with like a past workplace. If they ask me to behave in a way that is unethical and goes against the Bible, I automatically say no. This is not the right fit. That's a deal breaker for me, right? If it's a relationship or a friendship and they are asking me to go against things that morally or ethically, are a bad influence or really not good for me, or they're not respective of boundaries or XYZ, that's a deal breaker, right? If you're in a relationship and you're trying to work towards that with someone and they're in a place where the place of purpose is not aligned anymore, they're wanting to be on one level and God's trying to take you to the next level and they're unwilling to go there, deal breaker, right? And so it's going to look different for different people and different things. I've seen this in a ministry perspective before. Let me throw out a ministry perspective. I was a part of a church back in the day that was teaching some stuff that was anti-Bible. For me, that was a deal breaker situation. That's a you walk away, kind of a deal. And so you've got to figure out what those things are, because in those situations, those are like you leave. And God's got to address that stuff. It's not a good fit, XYZ, right? But then there are things where we don't just need to nope out of people, places, and situations instantly, right? Where it has more to do with, we need to learn how to navigate hard conversations. We need to learn how to navigate conflict. Listen to me. Sometimes you don't have to completely cut people out of your life, ladies and gents. Sometimes you just need to shift where they're at. They're not a bad person. You're not a bad person. There just needs to be a shift for a season. And it's not even that it will stay like that forever, right? It's just getting in alignment for the season that you're in. Right. Okay. And so it can look like that. Sometimes it's not a shifting of where they're at in your life. Sometimes their position needs to stay the same. Right. But sometimes you just need to have conversation on a mature level, be willing to address things that need to be addressed so that you can work through it as a team. Right. And so that you can learn some staying power in a situation, and so that relationship, whether it's in the workplace or a ministry or a personal relationship, can flourish and grow, right? And so it's very, very important that we learn to address this stuff in our lives in a way that is mature, in a way that's going to help other people to feel safe, in a way that is going to honor God with our interactions, right? And this is one of the biggest things, again, that is one of the most important skills that you can cultivate in your life as a leader. And so that's the first thing, is you've got to recognize the shift. Okay. And you've got to recognize whether or not God is telling you to stay or to go. All right. Figure out what those deal breakers are between you and God. And a deal breaker is something that even if you tried to have conversation with someone, it would not fix it. Okay. Even if you tried to have, deeper level of conflict resolution, these problems would still be there. Those are deal breakers, ladies and gents, whether it's in a workplace, interpersonal relationships, XYZ. It's things where if you're trying to change a person to make things work, you know that you were in a deal breaker situation. Okay. Potentially. And here's the deal. I got to say that with a little asterisk there. Okay. There are some circumstances where we're trying to change people, but they're not deal breaker things. We're just trying to be controlling and, in territory that we have no business being in. Okay. People are allowed to have different opinions from you on stuff, right? People are allowed to be their own individuals. However, if that difference of opinion is causing you to be held back in your life and your walk with God, if that difference of opinion is causing you to not be able to be obedient to God in your own life, XYZ, that's where we start to run into some stuff that's got to be addressed. Okay. And so I got to preface this conversation because a lot of the times we are leaving for the wrong reasons, or we're staying for the wrong reasons. And that's where we've got to look at our heart motive, right, to determine and to discern the shift in our lives and what God is calling us to. And a lot of that starts in the recognition phase. Now, let me say this. Once you are in the recognition phase where you start to notice some things that aren't adding up, or you start to become aware of things, I want to tell you guys, it's okay to not feel like you have to move instantly on some of that. All right. Now we need to be obedient of God. If God straight up told you to leave, there doesn't need to be discussion, right? You just get out, but if you're in a situation where you're not sure what to do, you're just kind of noticing stuff. I want to tell you guys, take time to pray, pray through a thing. And sometimes God will allow stuff to start getting on your radar over time because he doesn't want it to be as feel like as much of a blow to you. He will put stuff on your radar for a period of time, and he'll start talking to you about a thing before the shift actually happens, right? And so it's okay to pray into a thing, and to understand that sometimes what was good for you in one season and was fully in alignment is not good for you in the next season. I did a status on Facebook and YouTube this morning, that was talking about sometimes the reason why people and things and organizations cannot go with you into your future is not because they're bad or because you're bad. Sometimes the reason is that person, that situation, that organization has not grown and doesn't want to grow, and you're trying to move forward and you're trying to grow. That is an imbalance that is going to constantly cause issues, right? And you've just got to move forward from that. Okay. And so that's a circumstance, sometimes on the flip side, sometimes the reason is that person is growing and changing a lot, and you're the one who's not changing, and sometimes there's an imbalance there. It was good for a season. It's no longer good for a season. Sometimes the reason is it was never a perfect fit. There were components of it that were good, but it was never a perfect fit. Um, and sometimes it has nothing to do with any of that. Sometimes it's just time for a season shift. God's calling you to a new place or to a new thing, has nothing to do with either place or organization or whatever is being wrong, quote unquote, or, holding the other person back, XYZ. Sometimes it's just time for a shift. And that is something that you can only get from you and God in your prayer closet and really taking this stuff to Him, right? But if God tells you to leave, a lot of times what we do is we pray into it, right? We're like, oh, well, I've got to, I want 10 signs from God and I want an angel to come down from heaven and XYZ. No, just get obedient quickly, right? Okay. That's a no-brainer. God says, get out, get out. There's a reason. You don't have to understand all the reasons behind it. Just do it, right? But if you're in that place where you don't know what to do, it's okay to take some time to pray on a thing, right? That's very normal in the midst of transition. And when you notice things that aren't lining up, the number one thing that you need to do in your brain is to discern, are these the deal breaker things? AKA, if I'm trying to change another person or thing, and those things, if they didn't get fixed, would be things that would really impact me or my calling one day or XYZ, or hold me back or whatever. That's where, you probably need to do a shift, right? But again, that's got to be something you get from God and your prayer closet. And then sometimes we're too quick to pull the trigger on stuff, and we're trying to out people because they had a hard day. We're trying to out people because we have a difference of opinion, but it's not an ultimate deal breaker to have a difference of opinion. We need to quit being so controlling over people and allow them to have their own opinions, their own choices, XYZ, and they're not actually deal breakers. The real root is us, and that we've been through trauma, we've been through junk in our past. We don't want to resolve hard conflict. We don't, we take it personally when they have a different opinion from us. And so we demonize them and accuse them of not being for us just because they have a different opinion from us. That's a us problem, right? Those are the times when you stay in relationship, you fight for a thing, right? And you try to work through that stuff, right? And so you've got to discern which situation you're in. Right. Okay. And you've got to bring that to God. All right. So I spent longer on that than I intended to. But when we're talking about how to leave well, we start recognizing the shift. We notice the changes. We get obedient, right? If God says to do something, we get obedient. We do it quickly. We don't just sit on that and wait for 10 signs from heaven. We get obedient to God. Okay. And then we take time to pray if we're unsure. You don't have to move so fast. Sometimes God will show you over a period of time what to do. But then as soon as He does show you what to do, get obedient to it. Again, most people fall into one of two categories. They're either more tempted to be the people who will just sit in the funk and sit in a thing that is not God's will because they're out of a place of fear or people pleasing and they don't want to address things and they're, very comfortable in that situation and it's going to be hard to move on temporarily. Either we fall into that category a lot of the time, or we fall into the category where we get fed up, we storm off, we go, well, I don't have to deal with this in my life. And therefore we cut people off in our life for, any little thing. And therefore we don't have meaningful long-term relationships in our lives. And that is also a trauma response that is not healthy. Okay. And so you've got to discern which end of that spectrum you tend to fall on, right? Because neither is very healthy. What's healthy is being obedient to God in a circumstance. Okay. And usually it's going to fall somewhere right in the middle between those circumstances, and so that's something where it's between you and Jesus in your prayer closet and you got to take stuff to Him. Okay. So recognize the shift, taking time to pray and to figure out, what you're supposed to do. The other thing is when you're figuring out how to leave well, this is like a personal thing that applies to leaders and those who are not in a place of leadership with your reactions towards the situation. You got to put yourself in a place where you get rid of the guilt. I think that so often when we're leaving a thing, whether it's people that we really care about, organizations that we've been a part of, workplaces, whatever, right? We begin to feel so guilty a lot of the time, because we feel like we're letting people down. We feel like well, man, if I'm having to leave a thing, then it wasn't a success. That's not necessarily true. There's times and seasons for everything in our lives. And you've got to quit beating up on yourself because you need a change in your life, right? Because God is calling you to a shift. It doesn't mean you're bad or they're bad, right? It just means that it's time for a shift. I wanted to read you a scripture on this. So this is Ecclesiastes 3:1. For everything, there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. And so we have these different phases and periods in our life, and that's normal. Some stuff is not meant to stay with you your whole life. Some stuff was always meant to be seasonal, right? Some jobs are seasonal. Some friendships are seasonal, right? Some ministries are seasonal. And that doesn't mean that they or you are bad. It just means that it was meant to be in your life for a season. We even see this set up the way that God reflected it in nature, right? Nature has seasons. There's a fall season. There's a time for harvest in our lives, right? A time to reap the blessing. There's a winter season where the conditions are a little harsher, where, we're really having to depend on God as our source of strength, where we're kind of hunkered down because it's hard. There's warfare. The conditions are harsher, Then there's, spring seasons, time for new life, for new growth, right? Investing in new things, doing new things, right? And then there's those summer seasons, where, it's kind of the, sit back and relax seasons, where you're just hanging out and enjoying stuff, enjoying the blessings of life. There's all these different things, right? So how much more? I mean, God set up our world to have seasonal stuff. We're going to experience seasons in our life, right? And so you've got to discern, whether or not something is seasonal in your life. And just because it's seasonal doesn't necessarily mean that it makes the whole thing bad. It just means it's not supposed to be in your life for that particular season, right? So we also have long-term blessings in our life, right? That represents the marriages, the long-term friendships, XYZ, but not everything is going to be like that in our life. Some things are more seasonal. And so that's something where you've got to discern, and take stuff to God. Is this a seasonal thing, or is this, a more long-term thing? And most of the things in our lives are going to be more seasonal. The long-term stuff exists, but it doesn't tend to be as frequent, tends to be a select few things in our life. Okay. So, getting rid of the guilt that you have to shift. That's a really, really big one. Okay. The other thing that I want to say that applies to both leaders and people who are not leaders, and we're going to dive into that more in a second, is be respectful towards people, even if you disagree. Okay. So we're talking about operating in our own godly character, right? I want to tell you guys this, and this is something I planned on saying later. I'll probably still say it later, but it's important. How we are not responsible for other people's reactions. Okay. That's very important when we have this conversation, and understand that there will be people that you interact with throughout the course of your life who are both immature people, who are just normal flock, who are trying to leave a situation or a circumstance, and also very immature leaders. Immature leaders exist. Right. Okay. And so understand that you will encounter immaturity on both sides of this spectrum. Okay. However, you are not responsible for their reactions, their opinions, their reactions. That belongs to Jesus. Okay. What we are responsible for in our personal walk with God is our reactions to things, right? And so we have a responsibility between us and God to leave well in situations. An argument that I've heard from a lot of people is this, and it's so petty to me, but I mean, I hear these conversations a lot. They're like, well, I don't owe them anything. They treated me XYZ and they're not going to receive it. So why should I even go there? Because it's not about them, ladies and gents. It's about you and God doing what God is telling you need to do to exit or to leave a situation well, right? As you are in the process of transition. And so we got to get real careful to not get petty in the midst of this. Okay. I know that sometimes stuff happens that is 1010% wrong. It does, but this is where we are called to bless our enemies and to allow God to take justice over situations, right? It doesn't change the fact that we are still called to operate in godly character, even in hard circumstances. And even when we are interacting with people who are incredibly immature, right? Because we are still responsible for our actions towards God, And so that's something else that on the leader side and on the side where you're just a normal everyday person trying to migrate out of a thing, it's very, very important to remember that our actions matter in the midst of this, okay? Regardless of whether or not that other person is going to receive it well or whether or not they're in a good place, right? That's not what matters ultimately. It's between us and God, right? On how we transition out and that character piece for ourselves, and then we've got to understand that when people do act a fool, we've got to give that to God. Whenever, if you're trying to act in a godly way and they're not doing it, you've got to give that to God and go, God, I pray that you would take a hold of that situation. I'm going to pray for this person. It's not say I don't care about this person, but I'm giving that to you, God, to intervene and to work on that person's heart. Okay. So I just wanted to kind of, talk about stuff first. Now, here's an interesting part that I want to do, and then I have a recap kind of both groups, okay? What I want to do first is I want to kind of give some advice for leaders first, because I have seen and experienced, unfortunately, some leaders who have behaved very inappropriately towards the people under them in a place of them migrating out, whether it's been at workplaces, whether it's been pastors at churches, in relationships, like interpersonal relationships, right? And so, we've got to address this from a leader standpoint. As well as the normal person who's just trying to navigate out of a situation. Okay. So let me give you guys some advice for leaders. And what I want to say first, before we dive into this, is I want to lay some foundation with scripture. Okay. So a lot of the reason behind why we don't navigate this leading stuff well is either because of a place of fear or people pleasing or pride. Okay. Those three bucket areas usually, not always, but usually are a large reason why we don't do this stuff well, why we don't leave well in circumstances, okay? So I wanted to read you guys 2 Timothy 1:7. It says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and of a sound mind." Here's the deal. When it comes to having hard conversations with people and learning how to navigate this piece well, you don't have to go into this stuff not feeling any fear. Okay. A lot of times when you go into this stuff, you are going to feel some fear, right? It doesn't feel good to have awkward conversations a lot of the time, but we are not a people who are called to be slaves to fear. Sometimes you got to learn how to do this stuff afraid. If your voice quivers, if your voice shakes, do it anyway. Ladies and gents, the more you work this muscle in your life, the stronger you're going to become as a leader and the better it's going to get, but just because we're afraid doesn't mean that we don't do the right things in our lives, right? And so we can't let fear become an idol in our personal lives. And so that's the first piece, right? God has not given us a spirit of fear. That did not come from God. Thank you, Danny. This is so good. That's a great summary. So fear can be the first thing. The next thing can be we are idolizing those people's opinions and what they're going to think about us with what God's telling us to say above God's opinion in our life. That can cause us to not transition or to leave well in a circumstance, because it can either cause us to not address the things that we need to address and to not leave, because we're so worried about their opinion, right? Or it can cause us to, stay quiet in or the flip side of that. I'm not braining well today. You guys get what I'm trying to say. Okay. So people pleasing. Let me read you a scripture. Obviously, Jill needs more coffee today. All right. Galatians 1:10. It says, "For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ." This is Colossians 3:23. "Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men." Proverbs 29:25. "The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe." And I think that that's very important. When we are doing the decisions that God is telling us to do, that's what creates safety in our lives. A lot of times we feel like what creates safety in our lives is getting that other person's approval or not rocking the boat. That doesn't create safety. That actually makes us more unsafe. What creates safety in our lives, even if it means a temporary moment where it feels a little bit uncomfortable, is obeying God. you know? And I think that sometimes people who have been through trauma and a lot of hurt in their past don't view it from that perspective. But we got to go by truth. We got to go by what Bible has to say, right? And the other one is, oh, and this one closed out on me. Let me get it pulled up. Okay, my other one is Proverbs 16:18. It says, pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Okay, sometimes the reason why we don't leave well is because of straight up pride on our part. We're unwilling to do what God tells us to do. We don't like that it would make us uncomfortable, so we're unwilling to get obedient with the situation. So pride is the other big one that can really, really hold us back. And the Bible says that pride in our lives, it actually causes us to fall, right? Pride goes before a fall, and pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall, right? And so it brings about destruction in our personal lives. That haughty spirit, that prideful spirit will cause us to fall in our circumstances, right? And so this is why we can't be led by this stuff. We've got to get over ourselves to a certain extent. I'm talking to myself today just as much as I'm talking to you guys. I can use a good dose of this every now and then too, but we've got to get over ourselves. So often we are unwilling to behave and to act in godly ways because we've experienced trauma in our past, or because we don't like that it's going to make us feel uncomfortable, or we're unwilling to have hard conversations, or we don't like the temporary feelings that it's going to give us in the midst of transition. Ladies and gents, that's a us problem, right? Those are not excuses for us not doing what God is telling us to do in our lives. And we've got to, at some point, just learn how to do this stuff afraid. If God is calling you to be a leader in a big way in this upcoming season, this is the stuff that will make or break you right here, ladies and gents. And so we have got to get ourselves, whether we're from the perspective of just a normal person migrating in and out of stuff in a season of transition, or whether we're the big time leader that's going to be called to operate and to steward things on a greater level, right? We've got to learn how to do this stuff well. And we've got to learn how to do it when we feel uncomfortable, when we feel afraid sometimes, and also in circumstances where we know it might hurt other people. That's some truth talk. A lot of times we don't want to do these things because we go, oh, well, it might hurt Susie Q. It might hurt John Doe. And I don't want to hurt their feelings because they've had a lot of trauma from their past, or because I really care about this person. I like them as a person a lot, and we prioritize that above the place of obedience. That's people pleasing. That's wrong. Right. I told you that story about the employee that got fired and a few lives ago. Where the employee was, really, really struggling at a workplace. She was not being productive. She started off okay. And they had tried to have conversations and she was not responding. It was not going to be a good fit. And they were really grieving it because they liked this person's personality a lot. They thought this person was a really good person overall, but it didn't change the fact that the job was not doing what it needed to do. It was not in alignment. Right. And so you guys remember the story. They actually let her go and she was incredibly hurt by that up front. But she ended up very quickly getting her dream job, and she never would have worked towards that if they hadn't been willing to do what was best, and so I think that a lot of times we try to play God in other people's lives when it's none of our business. Really, how prideful is that when we try to do that, and a lot of times we try to cover or compensate for them. That is not our job to do that in other people's lives. We're trying to be God. And we actually sometimes are hurting them when we do that stuff, right? And we can't let fear of other people's reactions hold us back from doing what God is telling us to do in our lives, right? It's pride on our part, right? We're actually being very controlling and manipulating when we do that stuff. It may not outwardly seem like that because we're just trying to look out for their best interest XYZ, but really it is controlling and manipulative because we're trying to play God in their life. We're trying to look too much into their motives. I think that we spend too much time. This is something I've been guilty of in my past. You try to look into, other people's motives behind things too much and figure out XYZ and, do all of that. When in reality, we need to respond more to people's behavior. We're kind, but their motives are between them and the Lord a lot of the time. And a lot of times we will excuse bad behavior in our lives And we won't address things that need to be addressed in a place of love because we go, oh, well, that person's been through a lot, so I know that they're absolutely being abusive in this circumstance, but it's because they've been through a lot. They don't mean it, right? No, we're excusing bad behavior, right? We respond to behavior, and that might actually be true. That may be the reason why they're doing XYZ, right? But we're trying to play God in their life. That is none of our business, ladies and gents. We need to pray for them, leave that to God, right? And stay in our own lane and address what we need to address, right? So there's a place of health that we got to get to in all of this, where we're not trying to be God for other people and manipulate and control situations and do X, Y, Z in our lives, and where we've just got to respond and give situations to God and allow him to help other people too. Okay, I digress. All right. So we've got to learn whether or not we are the leaders or the people migrating in and out. And Alicia, I'm going to highlight this comment because I completely agree. That's completely true. We cannot, there's still a healthy side of this that we've got to watch for. We can't excuse abuse either. They do need to want healing and surrender. And in those circumstances, remember, that's a deal breaker circumstance, right? We're talking about this stuff today. If they are unwilling to go through healing and surrender and it's causing direct harm and abuse, that's a get out, not try to change the other person, right? Okay, so that's a good comment. All right. So here's the deal. We got to learn to be respectful on both sides of the coin if we are operating in godly character. Remember, we're not focused on their responses today. We're focused on our responses today, our responsibility for how to leave well. And so we've got to be respectful even if we disagree. Okay. And so they may not react respectfully, but you're not responsible for their reactions. You're responsible for your reaction in the midst of all of this. Okay. All right. So let me give some advice to leaders. Now, this could look like several different circumstances. This could be a leader in the home. This could be a leader in the workplace, a leader in a ministry, bunch of different stuff, right? But if you are in a place of leadership, right, this is very important to remember from your perspective as a leader, okay, for how to treat the people under you or that you're serving, right, during the course of transition and how to leave well, okay? So number one, if someone's trying to leave your organization or whatever, all of that stuff, okay, don't bully people into staying, leaders, okay? And I want to tell leaders, you do not own people. God is the one who, is in control of us. And I've seen some very abusive tactics from leaders in the past. And I'm addressing leaders first because we're held to a higher standard, right? But I'm going to get the flip side. Don't worry, because I know that leaders have been through a lot of abuse too. That's why we're talking about both sides of this coin today, okay? But we cannot try to bully people into staying a part of our churches, a part of our organizations, in terms of like a physical employer kind of a deal. That is not godly behavior. Okay. And I have seen even people frame this under the view of religion to use bullying tactics, right? Let me give you a perspective from a church perspective that I've seen in a very unhealthy way. And it's not even to say that some of this may or may not be true to a certain extent, but the way that they're approaching it is very ungodly. Okay. And so we got to talk about this. So let's say that it's a person who went to a church for a relatively short period of time. Let's say that it's just, a few months kind of a deal. And they are going to leave and exit that organization or whatever. I've seen a lot of pastors who, I'm telling you guys exact conversations that I've heard, where they will have conversations with that person and go, well, you have an orphan spirit and you obviously didn't hear from God because you didn't stay here long term and you just need to get obedient. And you've got a real problem because if you heard from God correctly, you wouldn't be leaving so clearly. And they'll go that route. And it's very bullying. It is not loving. Right. And it is very controlling and manipulative. What was the overall tone? Let's go back to our hearing God's voice conversation. Okay. With all of that stuff that I just blurted out. All right. Was that convicting or was that coming from a tone of shame and condemnation? That was shame and condemnation coming through. Right. So that tells you that's the voice of the enemy talking and not God. Now, let me talk about a flip side of this. Okay. Sometimes people are flippant and they're leaving for the wrong reasons. Let's say on the flip side, that person really did have kind of an orphan spirit kind of a thing going on. That they're just a flighty person who, again, address the beginning part of our conversation, right? Some people lack a maturity, and rather than staying rooted and grounded and working through circumstances that are not deal breakers, right? They are too flippant. They're leaving places with the wrong motives. They're doing XYZ, right? So there are two sides to this coin, okay? Sometimes the leaders are semi-right with what they're saying, okay? And sometimes the people leaving are semi-right, but here's the problem. It's the way that we address it that matters a lot, right? And I've seen a lot of leaders who will use bullying tactics and who take it upon themselves to be God in that person's life rather than releasing them with a place of love, right? And praying for that person. If we as a leader notice a legit thing and we think that there's a wrong motive or XYZ, the loving thing that we can do is not to bully a person or to shame and to guilt trip them and condemnation and XYZ. That is not a godly approach. A godly approach is we pray about it. And if God does tell us to speak into that person's life, we can, but more often than not, he won't. And we pray for them and we release them, we love on them. And then when we entrust that to God, he can bring that person back. I've seen it happen 1,000 times, where God will convict a person, if it was the wrong motive, and then they will come around, but God is God in their life, and so we can't bully people as leaders into staying. You don't own them. Now we can talk about their value and their worth. We can go, oh man, this makes me so sad to see you leave, but I will bless you and be excited for you on your way out. Thank you so much for what you've brought. You've made a tremendous impact. You see the difference in the tone there, right? One is very controlling and manipulative and assuming the worst. And that's the thing as leaders, right? A lot of times we think we see patterns in people. You don't know that 100%. You're not God in their life, right? You are not God. And yes, sometimes God will show you things that are not right about a person's walk or whatever. And 99.9% of the time, he has told you a secret. Okay. And that secret is so that you can take it to your prayer closet, so that you can pray for them and love on them. And am I saying that there are circumstances, am I not saying that there are circumstances where we're called to speak up? No, there are circumstances where sometimes, especially if you're in a place of leadership and you're dealing with a person, God will call you to speak up, but we need to check our heart motives and why we're saying stuff. And half the time we're trying to be God in somebody's life and we have very, very wrong Pharisaical motives with stuff. And we're trying to bully people or control people into staying because we don't want them to go to another church or we don't want them to go to another business. And, we're afraid of what them leaving would do to our workload. And people have all these wrong motives, right? And so as leaders, I want to caution you guys with that one today. I've seen a lot of abuse in this area over the years. And I want to tell you guys, don't bully people into because you don't own them. They are their own independent people, and they have to be obedient to what God is calling them to do. And the other thing I want to say to leaders is quit taking it so personally. Okay. Sometimes people are going to need to switch churches. It doesn't mean that you're bad or that the organization bad. It just means that God's calling them elsewhere. They're not supposed to be with you for a season. That's okay. Quit taking it so personally. Employers, sometimes employees will move on. You got to quit taking it so personally. Sometimes there are natural seasons and transitions for things, right? And so that's a very important thing for leaders, right? Don't try to bully, manipulate, or control people into staying, and definitely don't try to use the shame and condemnation tactics and all of that stuff, and even if you do notice something that's wrong, more often than not, that is a spot for your prayer closet. It is better to bless people and to love on people, than it is to try to force a certain outcome to a situation. That's where we are revealing a root in our hearts that we're not trusting God with someone or something, right? Okay, that's my number one advice for leaders and something that I've kind of seen abused and part of the leaving well process, right? Okay. Number two thing for leaders. Let's say that someone is trying to migrate out of your place of employment, organization, or whatever. Okay. Some leaders could care less about getting feedback because they don't want to change. All right. And I'll talk to you guys on the flip side about that in a second when we talk about people who are migrating out. But if it's a good-hearted leader, and I'm going to tell you guys, there are no perfect leaders or people that are a part of organizations because we are human. Okay. A lot of times we try to hold people to these ridiculously high standards, and the moment they do something that is, rubs us a little bit wrong, we get all up in a tizzy. We need to show the grace that we want to receive too on both ends of this spectrum, right? I'm not saying we put up with abuse, I'm not saying we put up with bad situations, but I think that sometimes we can get so offended at like the littlest little stuff. We've got to learn how to get a backbone and just deal with some stuff. Okay, we're dealing with people are imperfect, sometimes it's messy, we got to give some grace sometimes. Okay, but with that being said, a good leader a lot of the time is going to genuinely want feedback as people or things are exiting organizations or, whatever, relationships, XYZ, because they're going to want to learn what to do better, what went well, but what can we improve upon, right? And we're going to talk about this from the employee side, person who's not in the authority figure position in a second. But when those leaders ask for that feedback, can I encourage you guys with something? Okay. A lot of times they are good-hearted people who have strengths and weaknesses themselves. All right. Every leader is going to have areas where they tend to be a little stronger in a place of leadership and areas where they tend to be a little bit weaker. Okay. You guys have seen this example in bosses. Some bosses have no problem standing up for the man, standing up to the man and doing stuff, but they tend to come across very harsh and they can be hard on their people. Some people are very good conversationally and they're really good at letting people down gently and doing XYZ, but they have a very hard time having a backbone. Every leader is going to have areas of strength and weakness. And a lot of that has to do with their personality, their growth, XYZ, right? But when you're giving feedback, if they're genuinely open to feedback, this is a great open door because a lot of leaders and organizations want to learn. Some genuinely don't care. And that's a circumstance where you just keep your mouth shut, even if there are problems that need to be addressed, right? Because it's just going to go in one ear and out the other and cause strife and drama, right? But leaders who genuinely care, I think a lot of the times the reason why leaders don't ask for feedback is just straight up pride. They're afraid, they attribute the things that are going wrong to their worth as a person, which is so not true, right? You've got to pull yourself out of this, make it less personal and make it about the problems that need to be addressed. I had a conversation recently about something that was closing up a while back and I asked for some feedback on some stuff and I got some great feedback. And, a lot of it was constructive criticism about things that can be better in the future, but I absolutely love that. And, a lot of it was correct. And so as leaders, we have a choice whether or not we take feedback personally, right? And we go off on people in a place of anger, we get super bitter, we do XYZ, right? Or we can look at it as an opportunity to do better. And I want to tell you guys on the flip side, if you're the one giving the feedback, don't just give leaders negative stuff. Okay, give them positive too. Leaders need encouragement as well. And there may be a bunch of stuff that's wrong, and that's the reason why you're leaving a thing. Usually it is, right? Not always. Sometimes it's just time to shift. But a lot of times the reason why you're leaving an employer or whatever it happens to be ministry is because there's some stuff that just is wrong, right? But I want to encourage you guys, try to find the gold. As you're leaving, it's not to say that you're ignoring the problems, ignoring the fact that it's no longer a good fit. That's why you're leaving. Okay. But also include some positive feedback, because that's very, very important as well. And that's the way that God treats people in the Bible. He doesn't just focus on all of your flaws, right? He also gives credit where credit's due. And you go, well, this person was so awful, they don't even deserve any positive feedback. Is that a godly attitude, right? Maybe the only thing you can think of is that they were there. They showed up. That's something, right? Put it down. A part of godly character is that we don't just focus on the negative, right? And so how we say things, approaching things in a tactful way, even if we are addressing issues, that's very, very important. But as a leader, if you want to truly grow and become a person with godly character, it's important to get feedback, and if you're going to take it super personally from the perspective of, oh, well, this is, about me and I don't want to receive that. Guess what? You're not going to probably grow much as an organization or as a leader yourself, right? You've got to get feedback from the people that you're covering, and that feedback, while it can feel a little bit terrifying because, maybe they might say some stuff that you need to improve on, right? You've got to learn to not take that so personally. And that is the very stuff that, if you will receive that feedback, can make you better and draw people and organizations closer together, right? But if you're always viewing it as a personal attack, you're not going to get very far, right? Okay. And I understand that sometimes on the flip side, people don't approach things well. We're going to talk about that more, but that's very, very important. All right. And the other thing is, feedback is feedback, leaders. Okay. Sometimes people are going to say stuff that is ungodly, that is uncalled for, that is not warranted. Leaders have experienced this side of it too, right? This is where I want to say, take it to God. God knows the parts that you need to receive and that would be really good. And he knows the stuff that is just venom that is, not of him, right? But it doesn't still mean that we as leaders don't still need to get feedback from people, both positive and negative, right? That's what helps us to grow. We got to quit taking this stuff so personally, okay? And we've got to look at, how do we become better? All right. Okay. So that's the next one. All right. Next piece of advice for leaders when we're talking about how to leave well. Okay. Leaders, bless people on their way out. Bless them, genuinely bless them. Okay. That is very, very important. Maybe you haven't seen eye to eye with this person completely. Okay. Maybe it's a circumstance where you don't fully understand the why behind why they're leaving. Leaders, bless people. All right. This is something I want to say on the side of people who are receiving and for leaders today. Okay. When in doubt, always err on the side of honor. When in doubt, always err on the side of honor, right? And so leaders, rather than trying to manipulate and control people and shame people and do X, Y, Z, people would be so much more willing, leaders, to have hard conversations with you if they were not terrified of you, right? If they knew that they could have those hard conversations in a place with love with you and they were not terrified of what was going to happen, right? They're going to be more likely to approach you. And leaders, when you bless people on their way out, right? It's not saying you agree with everything that they're doing. You're allowed to have differences of opinion, right? But when you bless people on their way out, it's going to reap honor and rewards for you down the line too. We reap what we sow. And so if we're cursing people and if we're awful towards people on the way out, guess what you're going to reap down the line in your life, right? Okay. Thank you, Danny. This is very, very important for both sides of this token. Okay. And this is a part of behaving with godly character in our lives. Okay. And the other thing that I want to say, let me give you guys a perspective who have never been in a leadership position that's like management or a ministry leader or whatever. I want to give people on the other side of this a little glimpse. Okay. Leaders, good leaders, we've all encountered bad leaders too. And I can't speak for them, but like people who are genuinely trying to be good, who are work in progress as a leader, which is everybody. All right. Whenever someone has been with them for a long time, whether it's, they've been with you for several months, like in a ministry capacity, they've been your employee for a few years, whatever that is, right? You've been in a relationship with someone long-term, leaders genuinely feel sad when it's time for people to leave, because guess what? They're human, right? Guess what? They're humans just like you are, right? And so when you've spent a lot of time pouring into someone and you really care about someone, it is normal as a leader to have a reaction to feel a little bit sad, because you care about a person, the good ones do, right? But leaders, you also have to understand that a lot of times when people are leaving, it's not personal. Everything is for a season. And so if you will bless them on their way out, it will bring, tremendous peace and comfort to them, and you don't know, it could be that 10, 20 years down the line, God brings that person or that thing back into your life or to your organization. If you burned a bridge back here with that person, and a lot of the times, we forget we are responsible for our behavior. There's a lot of talk in Christian circles about honoring leaders and, do a prophet no harm and X, Y, Z. And I'm not saying that we don't do that. We need to do that. But also leaders, we have a responsibility to honor the people that God has given us servanthood and stewardship position, the privilege of being able to pour into, right? Honor is a two-way street. And if you want to reap honor in your life as a leader, get real good at giving honor to the people that it's a privilege that God has entrusted you with people. Okay. He doesn't have to do that. Right. And so it's very, very important that we look at it from that perspective. So anyway, leaders bless people on their way out. It's okay for you to be a human and to have emotions, and to be sad, genuinely sad. Maybe really good relationships, friendships were formed, in those alliances or in those assignments, right? It's okay to feel a little bit sad, but don't let that dictate the way that you treat people. Don't try to manipulate or control and, do X, Y, Z. Release people, bless people, honor people on their way out, even if you've had some differences. Okay. It's not that you agree with them on everything. You don't have to, but try your hardest to behave in an honoring way as well as leaders. All right. Okay. And that kind of leads into my next point for leaders is give honor where it's due and guard against offense. Guard against offense. I've seen a lot of leaders who can get themselves into a place of offense. Maybe it's a secular workplace. An employee turns in their resignation out of nowhere, and it's a really, really busy time of year, and it's really inconvenient for your team. And you take it personally. You take it as a personal dig at you because that person gave you no warning. It's going to put you in a bind, XYZ. And so as a leader, you get all offended and you get all, act in a certain way towards an employee, when really they're just looking out for their best interests and trying to be obedient to God. And so leaders, we've got to guard ourselves against the place of offense and not take stuff personally and bless people. You may not always understand the why behind stuff, but we have a responsibility to behave in a godly way too. And I've seen a lot of leaders take that in a very negative way as well. Thank you, Danny. That's super helpful. So leaders, we have to guard against offense just like people, do who are general people, right? And we've got to, even if we don't understand a thing fully, you've got to be willing to give it to God and let God handle this stuff and bless people. Okay. The next piece of advice for leaders, let's say that someone is migrating out of your ministry, your workplace, whatever it is, right? The next thing for leaders is don't just pop people up into assignments or alignments in your life because there's a vacancy or because there's an opening. Pray into these things and pray into a godly form of transition. We are called to use tact in our lives. That's a part of, demonstrating good character, right? I'll tell you guys an incredibly sad story that happened in real life at a previous workplace of mine. It was a big workplace, and there was an employee who had made like national news at this place, where they unfortunately committed suicide and hopped off the top floor of a parking deck. And it was this awful, awful situation, right? Well, the employer had their position posted the same day on the website. I'm just telling you guys, from a leadership position, that doesn't feel super tactful, I'm not saying they didn't have the right to do that. They did, but it's just like I think sometimes as leaders, we don't take into account being just graceful and using tact and considering humans and considering others, right? Yes, I know there's a job to do, there's pressure, right? All of this stuff. But, we've got to use prayer on how to shift into new alignments and new assignments. And we've got to take time sometimes to really pray into a thing. A lot of times we go, oh, well, I just have a need and it's busy and we got to get this filled right now, but if you get it filled with the wrong type of person, you can invest all this time, all this energy into training a person, doing X, Y, Z. And then if they're not the right fit, they can cause so much collateral damage to the people under them. You can waste time and resources and X, Y, Z doing this stuff. And so as leaders, we've got to learn how to look at people's character. We've got to learn how to take all things to God, right? And the other thing as leaders is we need to learn how to help people to feel honored on their way out. I think that that's very important too. A lot of people feel dishonored because of the actions of leaders when they're on their way out of a position. And I'm not saying that you bend over backwards and do everything to them. I understand that, like in a workplace, it's work and XYZ, but you know what? Just a little bit of tact, leaders, could go a long way. Consider other people's emotions, their opinions, treat them with respect and honor on the way out. And if it means doing something in a way where you wait a little bit longer, but you could get a good fit, if you wait a couple days and you can do something from a place of more tact, always err on the side of that whenever you can. So pray into new alignments and new assignments. Don't just stick something somewhere because there's a void that you feel and you need it done. Just be careful with this place of transition. When someone or something is migrating out, right? Don't just go sticking something in its spot because you feel a certain type of way or, XYZ. Like, really make sure it's a God fit, leaders. Okay. Here's the next thing on how to leave well, leaders. Don't get territorial, right? And don't get offended, about stuff. It's not always personal, I'm just going to leave it there. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that bullet point. That's very important. All right. Leaders, here's the other thing that I want to say to you guys when we're talking about how to leave well. Okay. You can disagree with a person and still be kind. There have been times as a leader in my life, whether it was in the secular workplace or whether it was, other stuff, ministry stuff, whatever, where I strongly disagreed with the person and the life decisions they were making. Like, I could see it from a mile away. It was like, this is going to end badly. This is going to be XYZ, but I was still kind to that person. I didn't try to force my opinion or my way on them because guess what? It's their life. Right. Now sometimes God, especially as a ministry leader, might call me to warn people on stuff occasionally, or whatever. And sometimes as a boss in the workplace, we're called to speak up, there's lots of that kind of stuff too, but you can disagree with a person and still be kind. I feel like sometimes people will demonize others because they view things from a different perspective than them. That doesn't automatically make them an awful person. Ladies and gents, you can disagree with people and be kind. Leader, you may not understand. That employee may have explained their reason for wanting to leave the organization, and it may make zero logical sense to you. And you're looking at that thing and you're going, well, they're just wrong and they're doing this for the wrong reasons and XYZ. Listen to me. That's a wrong attitude. You can put it in a box of, I don't understand, right? But I'm going to bless them. And I am more than capable of being kind to this person just because I disagree with them, right? That is called godly character. Okay. I think sometimes we think that just because there's a difference of an opinion, we have a right to not be kind to people. That is not true, ladies and gents. We need to be kind and respectful towards people, okay? Especially when there's a difference of opinion, And so anyway, that's an important one. You can disagree and still be kind, leaders. We've got to operate in that, to operate in a godly way. Okay, here's the other thing, leaders. This is an important one, okay? Say thank you for being involved and for the time that person was able to give you. It's amazing how much a thank you does in people's lives. Just showing some straight up appreciation. Maybe they're leaving at an inconvenient time. Maybe you don't understand all of the why behind things. Maybe you don't agree with their life decisions right now. Okay. This is very, very important, but you can still say thank you for the time that you were willing to give me, right? That shows that you as a leader walk in a certain degree of humility, right? You may not agree with everything about that situation, but show some appreciation, right? Thank you for this season that you were a part of my church. Thank you for this season when you did contribute to this organization, right? Just be kind. Say thank you. It's not to say everything's a perfect fit. And it's not to say that you're ignoring the problems either. Right? But say thank you, leaders, to people on their way out. It's very, very important. Okay. And I can't tell you how much it will make the people feel better under you, knowing that they've got a little bit of closure and they've got a little bit of support, and they will leave your organization or whatever it is feeling like they are much more willing to, be willing to be involved in the future kind of a deal, but also just have a sense of closure about their last season. It's very, very important for people. So be grateful. Yes, Danny, you are so awesome. So that was our last point. You can disagree and be kind. And then other point for leaders is say thank you for the time and for what people were able to give you in your life. Okay. All right. Next one for leaders. And this applies kind of to both, but it's a bullet point for leaders, especially. Understand, leaders, that some alignments are seasonal. Again, it's not personal. Okay. That employee was meant to be there for a couple years, but if it's their time to move on, it's not personal. It was seasonal, right? Relationships in our lives can be seasonal. Sometimes it's not personal. They just can't go where God's taking you next, right? They could be a very, very good person, very sweet person. Quit demonizing them, right? And understand that some assignments are seasonal, right? This can apply to ministries. Sometimes a church was a great fit, but there's a difference in leadership, or they've changed as a person. As they've grown, they need something with a little bit more depth, and your organization is not there. We've got to quit, making stuff awful when it was just meant to be a seasonal assignment. People are allowed to move states. People are allowed to have a life, right? And we've got to quit trying to be so controlling over people and situations, right? That we just take everything personally as leaders, right? Understand that some assignments are seasonal. And yes, sometimes things migrate out of our lives because there's bad stuff going on, but sometimes it's just no longer the right season. Doesn't mean they're bad, doesn't mean that you're bad. It's just not right yet. Or it was in a past season and it's not for where you're going, right? Okay, so that's another one. All right. Yes, Lady of Virtue. Everyone can't go. I had to learn that. Yep. And it doesn't mean they're bad or you're bad, Okay. Listen to this comment. Leaders, I want you to see this. This is good feedback for the leaders on here. If you're like an employer in the workplace, ministry leader, whatever. She said, yes, it goes a long way. I left a job where I worked 6 years and I never felt valued. So I left. And look at this. This is a great sign of growth in her as a leader too. She said, I tell my staff thank you every single day at the end of the day. I absolutely love that. Leaders, it matters. This stuff that we're talking about today matters more than you know. And we feel the effects of it because we're humans, right? This is why I'm telling you guys, if you want to be used in high leadership positions, it's not just about your skill set. The number one thing that you need to learn how to navigate is talking to people, how to have hard conversations, and how to navigate social well. That is the number one thing. And so much of that is tied to our character. All right. Okay. So we got to learn how to walk in maturity in our lives. All right. Okay. So here's the next one. All right. Final point for leaders, and then I'm going to hop over to the flip side for a little bit. Okay. There's probably more, but I just wrote down a few thoughts of stuff that I've seen over the years. Okay. Next bullet point for leaders. Don't just assume that people who are leaving your ministry, your organization, or whatever, don't just assume that they aren't hearing from God. Okay. Just because you don't understand a thing doesn't mean that person isn't hearing from God. And I think that a lot of times leaders will hop to this place, not even meaning to be malicious. They're just trying to figure out a way to box it in their brain, right? But leaders, just because you don't understand their decisions or their actions, or it looks weird to you on the outside, doesn't mean that they aren't hearing from God or that it isn't time for that thing. Sometimes we understand things in our life looking backwards. We understand why we had to go through that storm in retrospect. When we're in it, we don't get it. Sometimes in life, we understand why that relationship had to fall off looking backwards. Sometimes we understand why we had to be confronted or challenged with that behavior in our life looking backwards, right? We don't always understand a thing while we're in the middle of it. And sometimes we'll never understand until we get to heaven. There are purposeful times in my life where I know because God talked to me about it, right? Where I was asking God the why about a thing. And he said, Jill, I'm purposefully not going to tell you that thing because I wanted you to just do it regardless of whether or not you knew the why. And so that's very, very important for us. All right. Danny, you are so awesome for throwing these up here. So that's our last bullet point for leaders. And then I'm going to hop on to other people. Don't just assume that the people who are leaving aren't hearing from God or that it isn't time to leave. You don't know the full backstory. You're not God in their life. Quit coming from a judgmental perspective towards people and focus more on honoring them and blessing them on their way out. Okay. So leaders, we need to use some tact. We got to get out of this controlling position. A lot of people, unfortunately, will use authority positions to, just, lord power and control over people. And, because they're in it for the titles, and all of that is the wrong reason to be in leadership. Ladies and gents, wrong reason. And if that is the perspective that you're coming from, it's time to hit your knees and get in front of Jesus, because you know what? Leaders are called to be the greatest servants of all, and so you've really got to check, yourself as a leader a lot of the time, and constantly bring stuff to God. And, love assumes the best. Leaders, that's what scripture says. How often are you diverting to that negative place versus trying to figure out the why behind someone's actions, behaviors? That's another important thing. A lot of times we assume because someone is acting out, it's just because they're purposefully out to get us, or they're purposely trying to do stuff. No, a lot of the times the reason a person is acting out is there are bigger things at play going on. I had an employee one time. I'll tell you guys a real life situation for me. I was a supervisor, secular supervisor in the workplace one time. And there was an employee who just had a rotten attitude during a meeting one day. And it was kind of out of her character, and so after the meeting, I just kind of pulled her aside, and I was like, hey, I noticed XYZ. And instead of coming from a perspective of you need to shape up and you need to have a good attitude and XYZ, I was like, what's going on in your life? Are you doing okay? Kind of a deal. And it turns out that someone had tragically passed away in her life that she was really, really close to. She had just found out the news that day. She was trying to process stuff, and she had just gotten a tremendous amount of work dumped on her at work. And she was just keeping her mouth quiet, trying to push through the day, and did it excuse her bad behavior? No. But was she a human going through a hard time? And was that a situation where I, as a supervisor, needed to hop in and go, you know what, you need to take a day? This is important for you to take care of yourself and to not just assume the worst right off the bat, since it was very out of character for her. What would it look like if we just learned to show compassion towards people, supervisors, leaders, right? And not just assume the worst of people, love assumes the best, and sometimes people are having a rough day or they're behaving in ways. And I'm not saying that excusing this 24/7 is, normal, or that we should tolerate that. But sometimes we need to give the grace that we would want to receive. And we need to love on people and understand that we are serving a world that is dying for a place of love, and people that are hurting and that have lives and are trying to navigate stuff that they just don't know how to navigate a lot of the time, So sometimes we just need to show a little bit of compassion, that's very, very, very important. Okay. All right. I digress. Let's hop on to advice for those who are leaving. So let's say you're not a leader in a situation. We've been in both circumstances probably throughout our lives, right? Okay. So let's say that you're a person who is leaving a situation. Maybe it's a time for a church shift. You're navigating, leaving an old ministry and stepping into a new ministry. Maybe you're in a situation where you've worked at one workplace for, a long time, and God's causing you to step out and launch your own business, or switch workplaces, or step into a new position at your current workplace, right? There's a lot of, reasons for change. Maybe you were in a relationship with someone for 5 years and it's no longer the God fit. You're having to have the conversation that it's time to move forward. Maybe you had a good friend in your life for years, and, now there's a transition there and they're moving on, and it was a seasonal friendship, right? We encounter all of these things in different areas, right? So maybe you're not the one in a direct authority position, but we still have to learn how to leave well. Right? There's a lot of circumstances with this. Okay. All right. So advice for those who are leaving, who are underneath authority in any way, shape, or form. Okay. Number one, give honor to your leaders, even if you disagree with them in some ways. Now, what I am not saying is that you have to give honor to the bad behaviors. Okay. I'm not saying that you can't be genuine or inauthentic. Right. I'm not saying that you got to lie through stuff. Okay. But what I want to say is give honor on your way out. It doesn't mean that you have to go, oh my gosh, you were the best person ever if that leader treated you awfully, if they did XYZ. I'm not saying you got to go there. Okay. But what I am saying is behave in a way that is godly with your character, regardless of whether or not they've earned it or they deserve it. Okay. Because it's a reflection on you when you choose to not leave with honor. The people who leave organizations, whether it's a secular place or other place, and they're spitting venom at everybody, they're stirring stuff up, they cuss people out on their way out. That's a reflection of their character and a problem that is not good, right? And we don't have to agree with everyone and everything on our way out to give honor to a thing, right? And we don't even have to do people pleasing or be inauthentic. I'm not saying lie through your teeth about stuff because you're giving honor, right? I'm not saying that, but there's a way where we can leave things respectfully, even if we disagree and even in unhealthy situations, so that's very, very, very important, right? And I also want to say this for navigating interpersonal relationships at home too. A lot of times, let me talk to spouses here for a second, okay? A lot of times we would never dream of going off on a supervisor in the workplace, or someone like that and just, treating them awful, with the place of our tongue. And yet so many people will come home and treat their spouse completely awful, right? Giving honor is something that we need to be doing. It's not saying you got to agree all the time, right? But giving honor is something that we need to include as a lifestyle, right? Okay. And we need to be considerate of the people that we're around, even if it's family. A lot of times we feel most comfortable with family, and that's where we let our guard down, but I want to tell you guys, they need respect and appreciation too. So a little side note on all of that, but we need to treat people well, regardless of whether or not it's in the workplace or whether or not it's at home. We need to make sure that we are treating those in our life well, and if you wouldn't say it to your boss at work, we need to guard our mouth. And in times of high anger or in times where we are, going through, rough stuff, we've got to learn how to navigate conflict well, and it's not saying you have to agree with them on everything. You don't, right? But that's an important little tidbit. I digress. Okay. All right. So giving honor to your leaders, even if you disagree with them in some ways, give honor on your way out. I have never once regretted giving honor, even in circumstances where I wasn't a good fit for the organization or where they were doing some sketchy stuff on the way out. I have never once regretted giving honor on my way out of a place. Never once. Okay. There's a really good book. I'll throw out a good book if you guys are interested in this. There's a book by John Bevere called Honor's Reward. If you have never read that book, it is an amazing book. And it goes into a lot more detail on the point of giving honor in our personal life. So anyway, do with that what you will, but I'll throw that out as a good reference. Okay. Let me hop to the next one. Okay. Advice for those who are leaving. All right. Thank the leaders or the organization that you've been a part of for their time that they did spend pouring into your life. Here's the deal. Maybe they didn't react in some ways that were very good a lot of the time. Usually that's the case because people are imperfect, right? Maybe they made some really dumb decisions. Maybe they didn't value you the way that you should have been valued, especially if it's ungodly people, you're going to interact with all different people throughout the course of your life. But again, their response is none of your business, right? Godly character is about you reacting right between you and God on the way out. Okay. And so we don't act inconsiderately just because someone else is not acting the way that they should, because we have a responsibility to God. Okay. So if we want to demonstrate godly character, we need to be people who react in a way that's going to reflect well of us and our character, regardless of what they're doing. Right. So thank the leaders or the people or the alignments, whatever it is, on your way out of that organization for the time that they did give pouring into you. And you know what? Maybe they didn't do a lot of stuff right. Maybe it was a really unhealthy, toxic situation. Okay. Thank them, pick something to thank them for. Like just say, thank you for the opportunity. It doesn't have to be something super in depth. You don't have to dote on them and go into all this inauthentic stuff. No, you can just say, thank you for the opportunity. Because a lot of times the reason why you're leaving a thing is because it's not healthy anymore, or there's significant changes, not always. Sometimes it's just a season shift, but a lot of times you are leaving because there's a certain degree of unhealth, you know? And if that's the case, you can still leave with a place of grace and honor and gratitude and go, thank you so much for considering me. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Because guess what? They didn't have to pick you, ladies and gents. They didn't have to give you the time of day with this stuff. So even if that's all you can do at least that. Because again, how you leave a place determines often what your next assignment or alignment, it determines how that's going to go a lot of the time. Okay. So that's very, very important. All right. So thank those people for being willing to pour into your life. Okay. All right. Here's the next one. And this is especially important. And this is probably one of the biggest ones I see that we struggle with and that we get wrong in the body of Christ a lot of the time. Have a conversation if there was any kind of a relationship there with the person when you were leaving, okay? Especially in moments where it's midway through groups or assignments, right? Don't just walk away without having a conversation. Now, I want to go into a little bit more detail on this, okay? Let's say that you visited a church for 2 or 3 weeks. You maybe only had one conversation with the pastor, and nobody really knows who you are. It would be kind of inappropriate to have a super in-depth conversation in that kind of a circumstance on all, thank you for your time and blah, blah, because they don't know you, right? Okay. But let's say that you were part of a group for 6 weeks. You were heavily involved. Everybody knows your name. That person spent a lot of time on you. That's a circumstance where you need to have a conversation on your way out. Don't just ghost people. Ghosting is so immature, ladies and gents. And a lot of times it's not because people are trying to be ugly. There's a fear thing there. And I get that, but we've got to learn how to mature and have hard conversations in our lives. We've got to learn how to give people that because it's a reflection of our character. Right. And so have a conversation with people that we've been in relationship with for a long time. And I will tell you guys, especially when it's hard conversations face to face, or if you don't have that option via phone, is always best because people need to hear your tone of voice. They need to see your facial expressions a lot of the time, and at major transition points, this is critical, right? I will tell you guys, when I was leaving my last position, yes, Danny. Absolutely. We're better than this, ladies and gents. Maybe you were like this before when you were in the world. Not anymore, ladies and gents. Not this group. A lot of you guys are called to be big time leaders, and we got to learn to have hard conversations, There was a workplace that I was at. Well, actually, I told you guys the story. My flesh got me into a job because it just paid a little bit better, but I was feeling the nudge from God to not do it, and I did it anyway. And I ended up having to leave not quickly after because I didn't discern his voice well in that situation. But there was a leader in my life who I don't think I've told you guys the story. The leader of this particular organization was a manager who didn't work at my particular building. He works like 20 minutes away, kind of a deal. And I kept trying to contact him to turn in my notice. And it was like 2 weeks that I tried to contact this guy. Like, it was ridiculous. And I'm not saying this is a situation that everybody's called to. I'm just telling you guys what God prompted me to do in this. Okay. I think you would have been fully in your rights to just do a written thing in this circumstance, because of time restraints, XYZ. I'm just talking to you guys about what God told Jill to do. Okay. But anyway, long story short, I had tried to reach out to him a bunch of different times because I didn't feel comfortable just giving him an email resignation kind of a deal and just leaving it that and not having a conversation because I wasn't there very long. XYZ. I wanted it to be ideally like via a Zoom or a Teams call or something like that, or at least via phone, where I could have the conversation that way because I feel very, very strongly about that. Like, that's important. However, that's a conversation that I'll be real with you guys, I was absolutely dreading because I knew that he was not going to be happy about this, right? Because I hadn't been there super long. It had just been a few months, and I knew that, a lot of his backup help was about to be gone. So I knew that this was going to be an awkward, uncomfortable conversation, but God was talking to me about it. And he was like, you're not getting out of this, Jill. And so what was hard is I think he knew that I was trying to have this conversation with him. He was not a godly guy. And he kept putting me off, kind of a deal. And purposefully not following up with me when I tried to reach out to him several times to request this meeting kind of throughout. And I was in a situation where I didn't have to migrate into a new job instantly. I understand that in that circumstance, most people would be fully within their rights to just shoot an email and be done. But God was trying to use this to be a witnessing opportunity. And I think I understand it in retrospect. At the time, I didn't get this and it was driving me bonkers because it was already hard enough for me to try to muster up the courage to have this conversation or whatever. But anyway, so I was trying to get his attention, to have a phone call or to have this Zoom thing. And he was purposefully acting this way to try to put me off where I couldn't have this conversation, kind of a deal. And I was praying about it and I was so frustrated. I was like, I'm just going to send an email. And I was in my God time and God called me on it so fast. He was like, you will not do that. He was like, I'm trying to use you even in the midst of this hard situation to be a witness, because all the other employees around me at this job were bad employees, or not bad employees. They were not bad employees. They were not with God. Let me put it that way. I was the only Christian at this entire place. Okay. And God told me, he was like, no, Jill, they're watching your character and they know you're a Christian and they're watching your actions more than anything else right now. And he said, you are going to have a conversation with this guy before you just nope out, and you're going to do it before you send the email, and so basically, finally was able to track this guy down. I was pretty mad because I knew he was like purposely putting me off or whatever. And I was able to have the conversation via phone. He was very short with me, his response was none of my business. Same stuff I'm talking to you guys about or whatever. But I did it the right way. And God was like, good job, Jill. You did what I told you to. And I was like, well, God, he responded XYZ way. And God says, none of your business. You're responsible for your behavior and you approaching this the way that I'm telling you to approach this in this situation. Okay. All right. So about a week later, we had one of our normal staff meetings. He had come over to our building for stuff and I was helping a customer out on the phone. I had already put in my 2 weeks notice. I was doing XYZ, and he, was watching me like really, really try to help this customer out. I was trying my hardest to go above and beyond. And I will just tell you guys, I'm not perfect, but I try to let that be my character regardless, I'm not one of those people who I'm going to turn in my notice and then just quit on my job the rest of the time, because I'm still getting paid and / I want to be a person of good character and help the people regardless. Right. And so I was just in my normal work mode kind of a deal. And this guy's an unbeliever, right? He has not treated me very well. Okay. A lot of the employees did not while I was there. Okay. All right. But I didn't realize it, but he was watching me close. Like he wasn't in the exact room, but he was listening to conversations I was having. He was doing XYZ. And keep in mind, I was leaving within a pretty short period of time. I was going to be putting them in a bind when I turned in my resignation. He was asking me to do some ungodly, unethical things, which is why I was trying to get off of the job. Okay. But he came up to me and it was very genuine. Like I could tell, kind of a deal. He came up to me afterwards when he saw me still working hard. And he said, you know what, Jill, you confuse me. And he was like, in a good way. He said, I've had so many employees that after they turn in their 2 week notice, they just stop working completely. And, they don't demonstrate honor on their way out. They're really ugly. They do XYZ. And he asked me a question. He was like, why are you still working so hard? He was like, I see that you really, really tried to help this person and you're still going above and beyond. He was like, you're one of the hardest working employees I've ever had. Why are you doing that on your way out when you know that you don't have to do this? And I told him, I was like, because this is a part of my character. It doesn't matter that I'm on my way out. I want to do what's best for customers and I have a hard work ethic regardless of where I'm at. And I want to do well for the job that you've hired me to do. I'm still an employee here, and it's in that moment that he started asking questions about Jesus. Can you imagine if I had gone with my flesh in that moment and I had just decided I wasn't going to press through with that Zoom call? Ladies and gents, that was a part of my witnessing to him. I didn't have to say a word about Jesus. He knew I was a Christian. My character spoke volumes in that circumstance. And it was the character piece that got his attention right? He's going, why did you act differently from the world? And I'm not saying by any means that I'm perfect. Let me tell you, I've failed in this category a lot behind the years, work in progress. All right. But you know what? I think that so often we underestimate leaving well, right? That was the door that opened up the opportunity for me to talk to this guy. And he treated me badly. But did that dictate my character and my responses on the way out? No. A lot of people will use that as an excuse for them to act badly on the way out. That's not the way that this works. And there was one other thing. On the way out, they had kind of a social event that they were trying to make more mandatory that most people in their last 2 weeks would have noped out on. And I'm going to be real to you guys. I did not want to go. By this point, it was a very awkward situation. They were doing some ungodly stuff. I did not like it, but I went anyway. And that same guy made another comment to me. He was like, you don't have to be here, but you showed up. And he was like, wow. So I'm just telling you guys, how we leave matters. It matters. It matters to God. Whether you realize it or not, you are a witness to the people around you, and it has everything to do with your character. Are you willing to have hard conversations with people? Are you willing to work hard, even in circumstances where you've been treated unfairly, right? Are you willing to stick out hard situations, or do you just nope out instantly? Is your behavior only good when the people around you are treating you good? Uh-oh, that's a big one, right? So again, your life is the greatest sermon that you will ever preach, ladies and gents. And I found so often than not that, it's not that I avoid conversations about God. I don't avoid conversations about God, but you don't even have to talk about it that much. When people see your behavior and your actions, just by them observing you a lot of the time, ladies and gents, God will begin to work on their hearts and convict them and do stuff. But if you're behaving and acting just like the world, it's going to be hard for them to observe stuff and to want to have a curiosity about God, So anyway, I digress. But this is why it's important, for us to have conversations. If there was any kind of a meaningful relationship, even if you weren't super close to a leader, okay, it's very important to give them the courtesy of a conversation. So whether we're leaving as a secular employee in the workplace, it's important to schedule a sit down time with your boss if you can, or a Zoom call or whatever, but to give them the courtesy of that, because they invested in you. Regardless of whether or not they were all that with the slice of chips, whatever, regardless of whether or not it was a perfect relationship or connection there, right? It's very, very important. If you're ending a personal relationship, and not just a boundary setting thing, that's different. Like if it's something little, don't make a big deal out of it, but like, let's say that you've been in a relationship with someone for 10 years. Right. And it's a romantic relationship. You're getting ready to get out of the relationship. Please do not just send a text message to that person. That is so inconsiderate. Right. I know it's hard to have those conversations, but arrange the in-person thing. Pick up the phone. Right. Ministry leaders, pastors, if someone has the courage and the good character to want to talk to you and to say, hey, I'm migrating on to something new, thank you so much for your time, have the courtesy to have that conversation. And here's the deal. When you're migrating out of churches, let me tell you, ladies and gents, don't just ghost pastors or leaders who have poured into your life. I can speak to this as a ministry leader. Okay. It's very, very important, even if it's just a brief, you don't have to go into detail. You could be super mad at that person and you have a right to disagree. Right. But just saying, thank you so much for your time. Just wanted to let you know, I'm moving on to the next God assignment. Thank you so much. Just wanted to put it on your radar that I'm headed out. Leaders genuinely care about their people, good leaders anyway. Okay. And so when people just ghost, when you've been walking in relationship with them, whether you're headed out of a church or, whether it's an employee just dropping stuff at a workplace, guys, that is so rude of us. A lot of times, and I understand a lot of times is because people have not been taught this stuff, or there's fear, or they've been through trauma in their past. I get it, but we've got to grow beyond this stuff, ladies and gents, especially if we're going to represent God. right? So we've got to be willing to have those hard conversations with people. And so if you've had any kind of a relationship whatsoever with that leader in your life, whether it's at a church, whether it's at a workplace, right? Have a conversation. And you know what? Here's the deal. When you don't have conversations with leaders, you rob yourself of the opportunity for them to bless you on your way out. Amen. And I think a lot of times people, because I've encountered this as just a general person, I think that a lot of times the reason that we are a little bit afraid to have these conversations is because when we've tried, we've encountered abusive leaders. I've been there before. When you try to have conversations with them about why you're on your way out, you experience the bullying, you experience the, control and manipulation and guilt trips and all of that. But listen to me, just because you experience that once doesn't mean that your character should change on the way out, right? Because not all leaders are like that. So many leaders who are good and who are kind-hearted towards you, they want to be excited with you for your next move, right? They want to bless you. They want to pray over you. They want to partner with you in the transition, right? Not all leaders are toxic, right? But regardless of whether or not they are, because some of those do exist, right? We live in a fallen world. It is our responsibility, ladies and gents, if there was any kind of a relationship there, have conversations with people. Don't just ghost people. That is incredibly immature behavior on our part, right? And we've got to learn how to navigate this hard stuff well if we want to be successful in our lives and our next, right? So have conversations if there was any kind of a relationship there. And the way that we do that stuff is a direct reflection of our character. All right, here's the next one for advice for those who are leading. All right. If a leader in your life asks for some feedback on something, okay, pray about your response and be respectful, even if you're providing constructive criticism. Okay, this is very, very important. All right. There was a circumstance years ago where I was leaving an organization and I was in a position where I could have spoke up. I was leaving because there was some stuff that they were doing that was not godly. I'm just gonna be real with you. And it was a circumstance where they did ask for some feedback and where I would have had a full opportunity to give them some feedback. Now, remember, I want to go back to something I've already said. If a leader asks for feedback, you need to give them both positive and negative. Find something positive. If it was nothing else other than, I'm grateful for the opportunity, thank you for being there, find something positive. Okay. All right. And make sure that when you are giving feedback, it is respectful. Okay. All right. But if you're in these circumstances and you are asked to give feedback, just because they ask for it doesn't necessarily mean that God's going to tell you to do that every time. Okay. I know that I'm probably blowing your mind with this. All right. But sometimes there have been some times in my life. Thank you, Danny. There have been some times in my life where I prayed about a thing. I had the opportunity to speak into a leader's life and to give some feedback. And God said, don't say a word. And the reason for that was he said, they're saying it, but they're not going to receive it. It's only going to stir up strife on your way out. You let me provide justice and vindication on that situation. And so I just kept my mouth shut. Were there very real problems that needed to be addressed? Yes. But I knew that person was not open to receiving it. It was only going to create strife and dishonor and discord on the way out. And so God told me no, even though they asked for it. On the flip side, there have been other times when I prayed about stuff and God said, I need you to speak into their life because they're going to receive it well from you. They're genuinely wanting this feedback. They're wanting to make things better. This is a part of how they get better, right? And so there were other times where God did give me permission, but this is why we need to pray about everything, ladies and gents. So if a leader in your life asks for feedback while you're on your way out, whether it's a group, an organization, a workplace that you've been a part of, or whatever, pray about your responses. That's all I'm going to say. And if you are going to give a response to stuff, make sure it's respectful and make sure you also include something positive. I'm not saying lie or be inauthentic. Don't do that. Okay. But just pray about your responses with all of that. Don't just speak quickly with our tongues because we're mad or we're upset about something. That's very, very important. Okay. All right. Here's the next one. Recognize the good that the person or the organization has done for you. All right. This is important. Maybe it's not a good fit for you in this season. God's calling you onward. You've grown, they've grown, circumstances have changed, or they treated you really awful, and that's why you're on the way out, right? We've got a lot of reasons for why there's transition that comes up in our lives. Here's the deal. At one point, there was a reason why you were called to that position or that thing. There was a reason for the relationship. There was a reason for you taking that job. There was a reason that you were aligned with that ministry, whatever it looks like, right? Recognize the good that it did for you, even if it's not in a healthy place anymore. Because usually the reason we're migrating out is because something is no longer quite as healthy, right? But don't discount all the good that it did for you. That was the right job for that moment. It was the thing you prayed for 5 years ago, right? It was the right relationship for that moment. It was the right ministry for you to be plugged in at that moment, and I want you guys, so often we just demonize things on the way out again, when we don't give thanks to God, first of all, right? Or to the people around us for the good that it did for us in that season. It's okay to recognize that something is no longer a good fit, but to also recognize the worth and the value that it brought into our lives for that season, So be sure to express gratitude for that on your way out. I know you've changed as a person. I know the circumstances have changed, but, recognize the good and be grateful for that good on your way out. Don't just look at all the bad. Okay. Another important part of migrating out. Okay. Here's the next one. Figure out a transition plan to help to wrap up tasks. Don't just leave people and things hanging. Okay. All right. So this applies in some circumstances, doesn't apply in other circumstances, right? If you're exiting a relationship, this doesn't apply really, but if it's a circumstance like you're leaving a workplace, or maybe you were in a high up leadership position at a church and you were contributing a lot as a volunteer, and now they're needing to find someone to take your spot. Figure a godly perspective on all of this is we don't just nope out on people. Give the 2 weeks notice. I know it's an awful work environment, but if you can, give that to them, right? It's part of being considerate. And again, it has nothing to do with their behavior. A lot of times they didn't earn this stuff, right? Okay. But our actions are not dictated by whether or not they're good enough. Our actions are between us and God and us behaving in a godly way, right? Okay. So that's very, very important. If you're going to leave people or situations hanging when you're transitioning out, even if you're being obedient to God, sometimes the most godly response is for us to figure out a transition plan. How can I help over the next few weeks to serve so that you can find someone new to fill this spot? It's not saying we stay indefinitely, I'm not saying that kind of stuff, but figure out a good way to have a transition plan, because again, your actions speak louder than your words a lot of the time when it comes to this character piece. So that's very good, where you don't leave people hanging, because again, a large part of leaving with a place of honor is them seeing that you're a hard worker, that you care about their organization all the way up until the very end, right? It's not saying that everything's perfect, but it is saying that you help people out to the end as much as you can, so that's just a part of us having a good character piece. All right. So there's that. Figure out a good transition plan where you don't leave the people or the organization hanging, right? Offer it up. And you know what? They may not choose to take you up on it, leadership. There have been times in my life where I offered to help out in the midst of a transition and they said, no, thank you. We really don't need this right now. We're just going to take care of it ourselves. That's fine. They had the prerogative to do that, but at least you offered, right? That's what you're responsible for. Okay. All righty. Let me give you kind of a few bullet points for both parties that I want you to remember. And then I want to pray for us that we would grow in this area. Yes, I love this comment. She says, be a person of integrity, even when they're not looking. 1010%. Because you know what? Your hard work ethic is not about working for them or about how you feel. We work hard for God at our assignments, right? It's not about whether or not you think they're worth it, Anyway, I digress. All right. Good comment. Okay. Let me give you some general tips and then I'm going to pray and we're going to hop off because I know I've been on here a long time for this one. Okay. Numero uno, thing to remember. Whenever you're in the midst of transition, don't avoid needed conversations. And when it is a harder conversation or a major transition conversation, face-to-face convos are always best, especially the longer the connection has been. If it's like just a quick adjustment and you're not completely noping out on, a person or whatever, sometimes it's appropriate to have just shoot an email, shoot a quick text over stuff. I think sometimes we can make it too much of a big deal too, but for the really big stuff, it's always better, if you can, which I realize you can't in all circumstances, to pick up the phone or to have a face-to-face conversation with someone. It's a reflection of your character a lot of the time. Okay. All right. You got to face the fear. We just got to learn to get good at hard conversations. All right. Here's my next piece of advice for both leaders and those who are just naturally migrating out, who are not in a leadership position. Okay. Thank you, Danny. This is helpful. All right. Here's my next piece of advice for us. All right. Pick your time to have these conversations wisely when you are in the midst of transition. Okay. If someone just found out their mom passed away, it's probably not the right time for you to initiate that breakup conversation like 5 minutes afterwards, right? If that leader is having a meltdown over a situation at work, may not be the best time for you to pop on and go, hey, I really need you to talk to me right now. I'm turning in my resignation, right? Whatever this looks like, pick your time to have these conversations wisely. And it's not to say that everything has to be puppies, sunshine, and rainbows, for you to have conversations, because sometimes they need to happen in a timely manner and you just can't help it, but if you can help it in these circumstances, try to pick times accordingly, and let me talk to married couples again, right? Let's say that your spouse is watching a football game, right? And they're about to make the biggest play in the creation of all time, that is not the time for you to hop in and talk about your marriage problems, talk to them when they're already calm, they're not in the middle of something, and they're able to focus, right? Same thing with applicable to a bunch of different circumstances, right? Pick your timing to have these conversations wisely and try to be considerate. Don't break up with someone on their birthday. These are just decent human being things, right? For a lot of this, but it really is important. Timing is everything with a lot of this. As Kelly said here, use discernment with these, and just try to be tactful towards people. Treat people the way that you would want to be treated. Sometimes we can't avoid it. Sometimes we just got to do stuff. And I get that. But in the times where we can, be a nice person. Okay. That's a huge part of your witness, and just being a good person in Christ. Yes, Danny, it's important, right? Okay. Here's my next point, kind of touched on this. I'm going to say it again. Give the grace that you would want to receive in transition. People are imperfect. They're not going to always respond correctly, especially in high stress situations. Okay. Give grace to your supervisor on the way out of that job. They're probably stressed trying to fill your position. They weren't anticipating it. They may not always treat you in ways that are super great. Okay. I'm not saying they're right in that. They're not right in that. Okay. But give grace. Give grace because, moments of transition are incredibly hard on people sometimes, whether it's relationships, whether it's, migrations in and out of organizations, ministry assignments. It's just a little awkward. It's hard on everybody involved usually. Okay. So give the grace that you would want to receive, and you take responsibility for your behavior being godly above everything else, right? I love these comments. Don't be weird. Yes, a lot of times we make it weird. It doesn't have to be weird. Just say what you need to say, right? Love others unconditionally, give them grace. Absolutely. And yes, thank you, Danny. That's our point on this one, okay? All right. Here's the next one, okay? And yeah, this is good too. You've got to understand that people respond from their level of maturity a lot of the time. A lot of times people are not going to be able to give you a mature response because that's not where they're at in their life, okay? Sometimes you just got to understand where it is and move on. You just do you. Be responsible for you. Let God handle their responses. Okay. All right. Here's the next one. All right. Never let your loyalty to a person or to an organization be greater than your loyalty to God. Amen. Never let your loyalty to a person or an organization be greater than your loyalty to God. This goes to people pleasing, right? Discerning the transition, part of leaving with honor is being obedient. Even if we're a little bit afraid of the reactions of that other person, XYZ, it's very, very important for us to not get into a place of people pleasing and to obey God first and foremost, right? So that's very, very important. Okay. Here's the next bullet point. I kind of touched on this, but I want to throw it out there again. Remember, as both a leader and someone who's not a leader migrating out, okay, you can disagree with someone and not trash them. That is huge. A lot of people feel like if they have to leave an organization, it is their number one job to go and trash everything and everyone around them. Ladies and gents, that is not cute. That is not what we need to be doing. Okay. You want to talk about number one way. How many of you guys know that person who is quoted to be a Christian, claims to be a Christian, and then goes and behaves like that? It drives you bonkers, right? It drives me bonkers. We do not need to be like that. Okay. That's our previous point. Thank you so much, Danny. I know some of these are longer. So you can disagree with someone or something or a whole organization and not go and trash them. Okay. And my other point related to this is one of my big soapboxes on this one. Okay. All right. A lot of people on their way out of an organization will have a very, very real complaint with a leader or, with the people that they're helping to steward over, right? If it's someone that the leader's helping with. Okay. And what will happen a lot of the time is they will have some very legitimate issues or concerns that is the need for the break or the separation in the midst of this transition. Okay. Just because there is an issue or there are issues between you and that leader, right? Or if you're a leader and you're having issues with an employee, vice versa, okay? It does not mean that you need to go and spread all of those issues to the people that are still at that organization or trash everyone on your way out. Yes, there may be some legit stuff that is really bad, okay? But you don't need to be spreading gossip and discord and strife, even if they are wrong on your way out. Keep your issues between you and that person. Okay. This is incredibly important, right? And a lot of times they go, oh, well, I'm just doing it kind of in secret and I'm just talking to my friends about it to vent. No, you're still spreading strife and discord. Some of these people, just because you're leaving does not necessarily mean that these people are supposed to leave yet, okay? And when you do this stuff, not only are you spreading dishonor, not only are you acting in ways that are ungodly, the Bible has a lot to say about not slandering, right? Not gossiping, right? And when you go and trash everybody and everything just because you're on your way out, you could be ruining their experience when God has not called them away yet, right? And it is very ungodly behavior from us. We have no business acting like that, even if there are legit problems. Keep it between you and the leader. Go to them directly if you have a problem with them. That's a whole other point, right? So often we'll go talk to everybody else about a person that we got a problem with, and we refuse to have the courage to go confront them face to face. Listen to me, ladies and gents. If you aren't willing to have a conversation with that person face to face, you don't have a problem with them, right? You don't have a problem with them, because if you're willing to go talk to everybody else under the sun, it must not be that big of a problem. The problem is you. Okay. So if it's not a big enough deal where you are willing to have the integrity to go to address that person face to face, you definitely don't need to be talking to everybody under the sun about that situation. We've got to be a people who leave with honor and who do not participate in this stuff. Okay. Yes, Kelly. This is good. Sometimes we just got to keep our mouth shut, okay? Let God bring the justice. Let God deal with that situation. Keep the problems between you and them, and don't spew poison on your way out of churches, organizations, workplaces, etc. Right? Okay? That is not godly behavior. And a lot of times we're doing that to try to protect our image out of a place of pride, or we got control issues, okay? Can we talk about the real roots behind that? That's a us problem and a character problem. We got to address that, all right? Sorry, that is my number one pet peeve in the midst of all of this. All right, let's keep going. All right. Here's my other bullet point. We're almost there, you guys. I know we've been on here quite a while, but I appreciate you hanging tight. You are not responsible in the midst of transition when you either say you're leaving or someone tells you that they're leaving. You are not responsible for that other person's response. Their opinion of you and of that situation belongs to God. And even if they behave in an ungodly way, that should not dictate that you behave in an ungodly way. We still have a responsibility to act godly. Okay. All right. That's an important one. All right. I already said this, but I'll reiterate. When in doubt, err on the side of giving honor, not criticism. Okay. When you don't know whether or not God's telling you to speak up on a situation, always err towards the side of honor. Okay. That's very, very important. How you exit one season is how you will enter the next season. And finally, I said this to you, but I'm going to say it anyway. There are no perfect leaders, relationships, or organizations. Everyone's going to have strengths and weaknesses. Okay. And how you leave and how you honor people on the way out has more to do and say about your character than it does about their flaws. All right. So what I want to do is, if you want to get better in this area, which I'm putting my hand up to, because I've not always approached these situations in the most godly way, but I have learned a lot, grown a lot, and I'm still growing a lot, in this area. If you feel like you are called to be a leader / if you've been praying that God would use you in a big way and you just want to learn to get better at this in your personal life, we all can improve, myself included. Put a hand up in the chat. I want to pray for you guys today. I want to say a huge thank you to you guys for hopping on. I know this was a little bit longer today, but let me tell you, sometimes we just need these really practical conversations in our lives. This is the kind of stuff that holds us back from being able to step into God assignments, to navigate relationships well in our lives. And it's just nice to get some super practical stuff every once in a while, where we can address our stuff to become better so that we can receive better. Right. And so that we can not keep going around these same mountains in our lives over and over and over again, So I hope this was helpful today. And you know what? If you have not navigated this well in the past, we all have circumstances probably from our past where we haven't. Don't beat up on yourself and get into a place of condemnation. Just do better next time. We're all learning, we're all growing in our walk with Christ, and it's an important part of us just maturing, becoming people, that are going to represent God well and that are going to do better, so don't beat up on yourself. We all can use growth in these areas, and it's just a part of, maturing and becoming better. Right. Okay. So I saw a few hands go up in the chat. If you guys are still putting them in the chat, I'll pray for you guys as they come in, but let me go ahead and start praying. God, I thank you so much for conversations like this, Lord. I thank you that you are growing us, that you are working on us, that you are maturing us, that you are strengthening us, God. God, I pray that you would help us to be a people of courage, that we would not operate out of a place of fear and people pleasing and pride in our lives. But God, I pray that you would help us to get better at interpersonal conflict, relationships. God, I pray that you would help us to honor and be respectful towards people and things in our lives. God, I pray for wisdom and discernment for everybody on here today. Maybe they're in the midst of transition in their life right now. Give them wisdom on whether or not it's a situation where they need to nope out, that they've been hanging on to too long, or give them wisdom if this is a circumstance where they need to stick it out. They need to learn some better conflict resolution skills. They are not called to just nope out because somebody made them mad. God, I just pray for wisdom for people as they are navigating these seasons of transition in their lives. And God, as we leave places, organizations, relationships, whatever, help us to be a people who would honor you and who would do this well. God, I pray that our character, that our behavior would be a reflection of you, that you would grow us, that you would mold us, that you would help us to not hurt the people that we're called to serve in our lives, Father God, but God, that we would be an example, that we would love on people, that we would bless people on the way in and on the way out. And God, I pray that you would help us to be a people who we don't walk in that place of immaturity, God, but we walk in maturity. Help us to have the hard conversations, God, and help us to be a people that are going to reflect you in such a beautiful and in such a powerful way, God. God, I just pray for everybody on here, God, who put a hand up in the chat. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time if I skip anybody. I'm not trying to, but I pray for Kelly. I pray for Alicia, Danny, Lady of Virtue. I'm not sure if you were putting a hand up. Ro, Misty, hey, Chris, it's good to see you. God, I just pray for everybody who put a hand up in the chat and anybody that I missed, Lord. God, I just want to praise you for their obedience and for their humility. God, I pray that you would bless them for that. We all can grow in this, myself included. I'm still growing and learning. But God, I pray that you would just help us, Lord. Help us to become more godly with our character. I pray your blessing over them, over their transitions in their lives, over their next moves, over their next assignments, that you would give them wisdom, insight, and direction, God, and that you would help them to be a light that shines so brightly for you. Forgive us for our past mistakes. We're not going to hang on to the guilt and condemnation, but help us to just repent and to do better, God. Help us not to slander and to gossip and to trash talk on our way out of assignments, God, but God, help us to be a people of integrity, Lord, and that integrity would be demonstrated not just at the start of our assignments, not just when we're in the middle of a thing, but as we're ending a thing and as we're migrating into the new. God, we praise you for your goodness. Thank you for how you're growing us and loving us on us in our lives. And we give you every ounce of the praise and every ounce of the glory. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for hopping on today. And if you're in the midst of transition, I'm praying for you guys. I have been praying for you guys. And just know there's good stuff ahead. I know that leaving stuff behind is a little bit hard sometimes. And it can be difficult to navigate, but God's bringing in so many cool new things into people's lives right now. So just know I'm rooting for you guys. I'm proud of you guys. And if you guys need anything, that's my email address. Danny is fantastic. Thank you so much for popping that up there, Danny. And I will chat with you guys again soon. Have a great rest of your Saturday? Bye.